What type of spiritual leader are you? Tom Bandy asks the question, but suggests that the answer is provided by the types of people who gather around you and the anxieties that they bear. Lifestyle segments, it's captured your imagination. Why is it that lifestyle segments is so important?
Well, I'll answer that by backing up a little bit. It might be useful to kind of say, in my own journey, the Kicking Habit books was kind of my first leap into coaching and consulting, and the concept of corporate addiction and the need to break that addiction in order to thrive as a church. That was a very important concept because I felt like the church was frozen or addicted into bad habits. Now, subsequently to that, I began to think more about systems theory and congregational systems. And, at 25 books different later, I was writing about different programmatic kinds of changes. But like many consultants and coaches, what was evolving was clearly, it wasn't so much church consulting that was going to be transformative for the Christian movement, but leadership coaching. And so leadership coaching emerged as a focus around my publishing. And I know even when I was in Australia, I was there twice to tour across a number of the cities and speak. And
And I,
really,
I, I saw you there. That's that's how that
yeah,
connection began. Yeah.
yeah, I enjoyed that. And I hope I was helpful. But I also learned a lot. And that was kind of feeding some of the leadership conversations I was developing. The last time I was there, even in 2006, I think it was, I just released a new book called Global Positioning for the Soul. And that was an effort to kind of leave established Christendom thinking, that kind of box or that frame of thinking about leadership and clergy leadership, and begin to think outside of the box. So finally, just to say, my last several books have been focused on demographic and lifestyle research. And I've been really interested in going deeper into this new area of lifestyle research and how there are clustering models to track behavior patterns of different groups of people and how revelatory those behavior patterns were. And as I dug deeper, I began to feel that you could begin to discern beneath a lot of the habits and behavior patterns, you could begin to discern the deeper longings and the deeper yearnings, I would say, spiritually, that people had in terms of their interaction with religion and with religious leaders. So all that said, in that kind of culminated at one point in talking about, I asked myself the question, why is it different kinds of people seem to gravitate to different kinds of spiritual leaders, way beyond just traditional clergy? Why is it? And I began to realize it wasn't just because of style. It wasn't just gender or age or any of these things. Nor really was it about theology that much, to be honest. But I felt that different groups of people were motivated by different, what my mentor, Paul Tillich, would have called existential anxieties, that there were different anxieties that drove people and shaped their behavior patterns. And they also shaped how they approached religion or how they approached spirituality. In short, different people are motivated to seek God for different reasons. And therefore they're motivated to find spiritual leaders who in some way are able to model or articulate or present to them a positive answer, you might say, to their spiritual yearnings. So that kind of led to doing more and more lifestyle research. I could say more about what I mean by that. It's a significant discipline today, both in secular and religious world. But out of all of that, I began to shape and focus on really a number of different kinds of spiritual leadership today, and understanding why certain people connect with this kind of leader rather than that kind of leader. And that's
and
kind of the background of where I got to.
but you're suggesting it's not particularly based around theology, as in the theological position that people take. So, but you use the word model. Did you want to say more about what you actually mean by, the modeling that the spiritual leader takes up?
Um, uh, Usually when we think about church leadership or spiritual leadership, we tend to focus on the function of leadership. For example, functions like pastoral care and preaching and administration and church growth uh, and education and teaching and that sort of thing. But I think what's more significant above and beyond the function is the identity, I would say, of the spiritual leader. Different people, in a sense, are shaped and wired, if I might say it this way, to be a certain, you might say, kind of spiritual leader. And they're wired and they're shaped by their life experiences. And so, for example, they're in the church, we have valued in the institutional church, three different kinds or identities of leader that we think really of Christendom. And I call them the constant visitor, the constant gardener, and the constant builder. And functionally, they're caregivers and they're enablers, facilitators, and they're CEO types that manage programs. And traditionally, clergy kind of move among those different roles in their identity.
So
But
that's from within, like that's been shaped by a Christendom kind of context. Is that what you're suggesting?
well, yes, and in terms of culture, there's a sense in which culture, and I'm mainly here referring to Western culture, European, North American, Australian, New Zealand to some extent, but culture was not as complicated, you might say, not as diverse. And in a sense, what did we look for in culture? Well, we tended to look for caregivers and facilitators and program managers because the existential anxieties, you might say, that drove us in our quest for God tended to be anxieties around, the fears of emptiness or meaninglessness or estrangement and that sort of thing. But as culture diversified, as life got more complicated, there are other anxieties now that drive people, that shape lives. And that leads them to seek different kinds of spiritual leaders. So what I was trying to do was understand what it was that triggered a connection between a seeker and a mentor, between a spiritual traveler, so to speak, and a spiritual guide, so to speak, as they search for those connections. And there's more complexity there than perhaps ever before.
And so you've picked all of this up within your book that you published in 2016, Spiritual Leadership. Um, and I actually found it to be a really insightful analysis um, uh, because there's a questionnaire at the back that actually asks you,
Yeah.
what type of leader you are. Um, but it's as you say, it's about the people who actually follow you, the people that connect with you, who it is that, engages with what it is that you're kind of bringing, your full self.
And what happens is, oh, sorry, as I coach clergy and talk to different clergy, time and time again, and I think you'll identify with this, clergy are expressing frustration with me. I don't belong, I'm not effective, I don't feel fulfilled. And more you see clergy dropping out of the church. Or you discover that there aren't more people entering into the clergy profession. And why is it? And I think it's because their function is at odds with their identity. That they're expected institutionally to function as a caregiver or as a facilitator or as a CEO.
So
But they're
the
discovering, yeah,
constant leaders, because
yeah,
there's the three categories that you put in there within spiritual leadership, your book. Um, and those constant ones um, are that first category that you're talking about. And the
yeah,
institution is expecting people, by and large, to function as clergy out of those models or out of
yes.
those ways of being. But you're suggesting that kind of younger generations and so forth don't necessarily want to fit in, and they don't want to express themselves in that way.
Yeah, that there's a religious or a spiritual motivation, but that's not where it's going to be addressed. And it's not just younger generations. This is very true of baby boomer generations and the transformations that's happening. So, for example, Matt, I think one of the most common transitions I see among clergy or spiritual leadership is that they become frustrated with being either a visitor caregiver or a facilitator or even a CEO managing programs. And in a sense, the Holy Spirit is eliciting something different. They're reinventing themselves. And this is another category of leadership I see emerging that I just call organic leadership. It's a much more fluid and adaptive, non-institutional kind of leadership. And so some of the leaders, and some of them become some of the mega church leaders we have recognized, and they may be conservative or liberal. There are both kinds. But some of these larger church leaders, what they're dedicated to is really adult faith formation, or they sometimes it's called discipling. And they're mainly focused on connecting with a spiritual seeker or a spiritual traveler and sort of guiding them and mentoring them through a maturation process where they emerge in a sense more deeply faithful and clear about their commitment to Christ and so on. And that's what I call a discipler mode. It's not a CEO mode. In fact, many of the discipler leaders I know are very frustrated with CEO type things because they don't want to get bogged down in programs. They want to talk to people. And they want to grow up people. Now, that's transitioning too in our culture today. And I see that some of those disciplers whose feet were very much grounded in the Christian movement are shifting over now, and I just call them gurus or life coaches. And they'll become, there's a whole world of spiritual guide kinds of people out there now, and they're more broadly spiritual but not religious, and they often cross or blend over different religious traditions. And so some people are gravitating to that kind of guru-like spiritual leadership, and you'll find them online, and you might find them in different locations. And then beyond that, there's even
So with
more.
that though, Tom, with that, so within the book though, you talk about the people that are connecting with leaders, spiritual leaders who are kind of operating out of that realm, actually have different anxieties. Did you want to say something about the anxieties that those people have who gather around those type of spiritual leaders?
Yeah, that's yeah, and yeah, I can do that. And I think um, here are the different anxieties I see today that drive the quest for God, and they vary among different kinds of people, and even within certain groups of people, it changes, it evolves. Life is messy, but the anxieties tend to be around emptiness, meaninglessness, fate and death, guilt and shame, and displacement and estrangement. And people seek God, and even biblically, if we look, people came to Jesus for different reasons. Some people came to Jesus for healing, some people came to him for justice, some people, same thing today. So some people in their spiritual quest, they're facing, you might say, a life situation of estrangement or displacement, which means that they're looking for a spirituality which will kind of rescue them from their loneliness or gather them into community And then there are certain spiritual leaders who are particularly, you might say, adept, wired, called, and this is the kind of thing that they do well. They may not manage a church well, but they can do that well. And in a sense, in the complexity of life and the great mobility of life now, you have travelers seeking mentors, you have seekers seeking teachers, and they're seeking them, through multimedia and social media and through any number of ways. So the kind of the leader I call more organic, the discipler kind of leader or the guru type of leader, they tend to be speaking very much to the people who feel lost and they're looking for direction in the world, a purposelessness in their life. And they also attract people who are really wrestling with the feelings of being what I call flawed, that they sense that they're very imperfect, and they feel a lot of anxiety and guilt around that. And a lot of those, not all of them, if I could typify them demographically, there are a lot of boomers in that category. There are a lot of baby boomers now dropping out of the institutional church. They don't want to manage programs. They don't really need the pastor to visit them all the time. But they are purposeless. They want a sense of direction, and they also have a real sense of failure, the flaw. Maybe they failed in their families and their marriages. Maybe they failed in keeping the earth environmentally healthy or whatever. And they carry that and they look for the kind of leader who can grow them in their faith, who can mentor them in their faith. And that's why you see a different kind of leader emerging to respond to a different kind of seeker. And a lot of that is now beyond the life of the institutional church. And so we see a lot of different faith communities and spiritualities and mentoring relationships emerging.
Yeah, because it's been said for some time that, particularly within the Australian context, that the last place that people are going to go searching for some of these answers is the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so they will search in all the other different places. And of course, some of those needs can be fulfilled without a godly component to it. So, particularly because we are living within a secular age, and within the Australian context, at least, there's no kind of wider storied pressure to actually belong within the church at all.
That's right, and I think another way to look at it is to kind of reflect that in the Christendom world, in that institutional world, we tended to assume that the path to personal fulfillment, you might say, was through worship. It was through what I call the Sunday morning experience. So you could find fulfillment and relief for your anxieties. Come to church, come to worship, enjoy our hospitality, and so on. And so we've spent so much focus in the institutional church on what happens on Sunday morning. But in the second category of spiritual leadership, the key is not worship, the key is relationship. And so in the organic leader, we're not managing program, we're building deeper and deeper relationships that can mentor and draw people deeper and deeper into holistic, I would say, maturity, psychological as well as physical, but also spiritual. But there is yet a third emerging trend, I think. And so we have people who primarily find fulfillment maybe through Sunday morning, through worship. That's a declining population. There are more and more people who are going to find their fulfillment through a deep relationship with someone they consider to be authentic and spiritual and profound. But now we're seeing other groups of people, and their sense of fulfillment is through outreach. It is through self-sacrifice or being a blessing to other people, you might say. And that's where the emerging categories of spiritual leadership are, which I describe as the futurist, the visionary, and then also as the mentor, which I sometimes call the Greek interpreter, and then finally is the pilgrim. And these are what I'd see are a new kind of spiritual leadership emerging. And to be honest, when I was in Australia with your folks, with people there, I was seeing this emerging more in Australia. And I brought that back here in Canada, and I began to see it more in Canada and then more in Europe. And I have connections in South Africa and even in Switzerland. And I began to see that this third group of visionary, mentor, and pilgrim was emerging, you might say, as probably the most dynamic and exciting trends in spiritual leadership. And there were more and more lifestyle groups or lifestyle segments, or more and more different groups of people driven by different kinds of anxieties often around fate and dread, the anxieties around global warming, or the anxieties around war, or hunger or homelessness or whatever. And they were looking for a different kind of spiritual leadership who really could model the kind of what I call neo-monastic self-discipline, that they were very simple in their lifestyle. They were very sacrificial in their generosity. They were very uh, um, disciplined in their spiritual lives. And they tended, in a sense, to travel in smaller groups or relationships. So that the visionary tends to collect around himself or herself a fairly small group of very passionate people. The mentor tends to really connect one-on-one in a very interpersonal, deep relationship. And the pilgrim tends to kind of travel through cultures and time. And like monastic pilgrims before, they kind of travel through the countryside, living out a very intense spiritual life, and along the way serving people in very simple and generous ways in whatever capacity they can, humble sort of servants. And so there's a new attraction to a different kind of spiritual leader that's not about worship in any sort of organized way. And it's not really just about friendship or belonging or relationship either, but it's a more intense spiritual practice and discipline and companionship, which I've come to think of as the pilgrim band. And if you think of the pilgrim band or that neo-monastic experience of high mutual accountability, the ability to kind of mutually mentor each other through the life struggles and challenges that we face. The mobility of being able to be anywhere, travel anywhere, and yet stay together, whether it's through social media or in person or whatever, and to hold one another accountable. This kind of pilgrim band, to me, is the exciting thing that's emerging today in the Christian movement. And I think, in a sense, the pilgrim band is what begins to replace the local congregation as the primary unit of the Christian movement. And in a sense, we'll see it's like a return to the pre-Christian world, and to the, you might say, the companionships, the small group of people that accompanied St. Paul, for example, or the monastic communities that began to develop in the 4th and 5th centuries. That's, again, we're seeing kind of a return to that kind of spiritual leadership, and it's a response to a growing spiritual yearning, a different kind of anxiety, you might say, about life that is driving the quest for God in new ways, in different ways than we have been used to in the 19th and 20th centuries.
So this pilgrim band that you talk about in terms of the third category, the extremist leaders, can the pilgrim band actually relate to community? Like, can they still gather as congregation?
Yes, they can, but it will be, how do I say it? It'll be mobile or temporary. Let's imagine, okay, we'll think of monastic times, and we'll think of how pilgrimage unfolded in ancient and monastic times. And as the pilgrim traveled to whatever their spiritual destination might be, the New Jerusalem or whatever, they would travel together in a group, mentoring, talking, serving, and then they would pause at hospices or hospitals. And there would be actual kind of hospices or caravansaries or locate where these people would congregate. They would meet together. They would rest together. They might worship together, share food together, mentor with each other. But it's not like our current congregation. We think of a community of faith as something that's very stable and sustainable, and we recruit people into it thinking that they're going to stay in the building. They're going to stay with us. But this kind of community of faith now is ever changing. It's very fluid. It's very mobile. And so people will come and people will go, and they may stay for a day, a week, years, and then go. Or they may stay and go and connect through social media or online. But it's not a solid, it's a fluid. It's not a building. It is a movement, and it's not a membership. It is a spirit. It is a brotherhood or sisterhood, so to speak. So yeah, I would say that pilgrim bands will come together in a larger collective, but not in the sense that we think of it as kind of a permanent, building in the community where everybody goes to on Sunday morning. But it'll be a much more fluid and mobile experience. But the primary unit really will be the pilgrim band itself, that smaller group of mutual accountability, heavily engaged in a simple life and service to the world, that becomes you might say, the real moving force in the Christian movement of the future.
So could a building placed within a community be the basis from which people come in and move out from? But it is kind of like the holding space.
It is kind of like a holding space. I mean, even in my brief experience with Australia, I did see, what do we see? We see the emergence of, you might say, the faith-based cafe, or the faith-based social center, or the faith-based community center. And again, people were kind of coming and going and passing through, and often in the cafe, you would meet one of these, what I call more extreme spiritual leaders, the mentor, and the mentor is literally sitting and just drinking coffee, and has that amazing identity and capacity to meet a complete stranger and in 10 minutes help them understand their purpose and calling in life. I mean, there's a certain different identity there that these spiritual leaders have. So you can do that with a property. And already I'm involved in talking with a lot of churches about repurposing their property. How do you repurpose that? It's the same building, but can we renovate it, change it, do something with it? So it functions in an entirely different way, but it is still a spiritual center, you might say. It is still a locus for Christian interaction. And so, yeah, we can repurpose our buildings in different ways. And I think, but what we need, of course, is you can't just repurpose the building and then just rely on a traditional Christendom clergy.
You got to repurpose the mindset.
You got to repurpose the leader as well as repurposing the building, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So then, how does all of this relate to the context we are finding ourselves in now, where the institution's been marginalized more and more? We've had movies recently about the exposure of sexual abuse. We've had in Australia, inquiries, royal commissions,
Yeah.
and largely the church is on the nose. So it's not like people are going to automatically. There is no broader pressure or encouragement to actually engage with the institution and the institution is grappling with the fact that shrinking resources, becoming, as you say, less relevant to the living of people, not the lifestyle, but the living. So what is the way forward for the institution? And are you seeing examples of institutions where they are actually empowering some of these other leadership styles for them to have a say in the future directions of the institution?
Well, a quick answer to your last question is, yeah, I am. I mean, I also do coaching with adjudicatory leaders of different denominations. And there you can see some movement now where there's real intentionality by a bishop, for example, to try to appoint the right spiritual leader to the right community context rather than a clergy person to a church. And there is some energy around that. It's not widespread, but it's an awakening. It is there. It's there a little bit in some of the seminaries, although they tend to be the last to adapt to some of the changing cultural situations. We're recognizing that spirituality emerges out of anxiety. That the root, you might say, of spiritual life and the root of spiritual longing, you might say the quest for meaning and purpose in life, for something more, that's rooted in the existential realities of our lives, the anxieties. And the very fact that we, in our finite experience, when in our existential experience, we are wrestling with displacement, estrangement, emptiness, meaninglessness, fate, death, guilt, shame. These are the realities of our situation in life. And they may dominate our lives in different times in different ways. Even in my life, there are certain anxieties that have been stronger here or later or whatever, and the same. But we see the patterns in society of these existential anxieties. And really, as long as there's anxiety, there's a desire for hope. And as long as there's a desire for hope, there's a spiritual awakening. There's a spiritual yearning. And it can be answered, you might say, or addressed in a lot of different ways, above and beyond the old traditions and institutions that we once knew. But because of that, the spirituality is alive and well in the world. And spiritual yearning is very powerful in the world. And I would say, and therefore the relevance of Christ, or I would say the relevance of incarnational experience, or that intersection of divinity and humanity, or of that crossing of infinite meaning with existential anxiety, that's very real. That's at the heart, you might say, of Christ. And so I would say that the concept of incarnational experience, of experiencing the immanence of God, that is life-changing in terms of addressing existential anxiety, that still remains and continues to be a huge presence and power within our world. And I use the word incarnational experience because I don't want to try to limit our sense of Christ to a particular dogmatic point of view, or a particular historical picture or image or something like that. But it is that incarnation, that intersection of infinite meaning with finite hunger. And that's very much at the heart of a lot of the turmoil and anxiety and life situations that we're facing today. So the Christian message is a very vital message, but it is being expressed in different ways. And in particular, I think the way people are responding to the incarnational experience, maybe we'll call it gospel, the way they're responding to it is not in the sense that this is new information, but rather that this is a message of hope. And so it's not that I need to know it all or have this great, but I have to have hope. And in order to have hope, I need courage. I need to have the courage to keep going, the courage to keep trying. And so therefore I need a role model. I need someone who's been there, done that, who knows my anxiety, who suffered with my anxiety, and who has managed to come out of that with hope. That's spiritual leadership today, to me. It is an act of courage, a role model of courage who's overcoming the kind of anxiety that I am facing at this moment in my life. My sibling, my sister, my daughter, my neighbor, they may have a different anxiety, and they may be, certain, they may need a different kind of spiritual leader. That's fine. And even in my life, a year from now, 2 years from now, it'll be different. But it's still about incarnational experience.
Found those the last couple of pages within the book particularly crystallizing for me in terms of the filling out that questionnaire that actually helps you recognize the type of spiritual leader that you are. And then, of course, the challenge towards the back of the book is progressing, maybe, or moving to different ways of being. But you're suggesting that you can only do that if there's some sort of crisis, which probably isn't a great way to sell. Probably isn't a
No,
great way to sell it.
but I would say, my advice to clergy in general, my sense is, clergy, we are finding a different kind of self-awareness. I mean, we've been absorbed by personality typologies and enneagrams and a lot of other things. But what I'm observing and what I would urge is we become self-aware of how the Holy Spirit is changing us, is reinventing, rewiring, changing our very identity, not just asking us to improve certain skills, but the Spirit is changing me. And I think for many clergy, they have this awareness that somehow I'm a different person, that the Holy Spirit is reshaping me in some way, which makes me discontented with my current roles and my current place, but also discontented with the people that I'm associated with. And I long to be with different kinds of people. And I think my sense is you have to be aware, self-aware of how the Holy Spirit is reinventing you, recalling you. You were called, and now you're being recalled, but you're being reinvented in a different way. And to accept that, to allow that, to admit that, you might say, to yourself, to your bishop, to your spouse, to your parishioners, but that's an act of courage because the risk is enormous. But God is reinventing you to become something else. And so more and more clergy, I think, are aware of this. It's not just their personality or their skills. They're aware of something profoundly happening in their lives that's just redirecting them and their calling. And one way to discern that, to me, is to always ask the question, where is my joy? Who do I want to be with? It's, do I really want to be with the people I'm with? Or do I hunger and long to be with those people over there? Because when I'm with those people over there, for whatever reason, I feel this tremendous joy and vitality and excitement in life. And to me, that's a clue to the working of the Holy Spirit. That's a clue to where we need to be, who we need to be with, and therefore how God is reinventing my identity and reshaping me. And you kind of try to go with the Holy Spirit in that direction. It's risky, but it can be very fulfilling.
So I think that that's profound in many ways, and we could continue the conversation around that. One of the things that kind of just really spoke to me was this challenge that you offer within the book. And I just want to say this, highlight this quote because I think it brings out some of what you're actually saying about hope. But it is a massive challenge. And you say in page 167, after all, you can only find courage when you discover that you are a coward. This shocking revelation that one is in fact a coward is the necessary prerequisite to finding courage.
Wow, did I write that? That's a good thing to say. Because I think you face clergy face in almost a despairing way, a sense of inadequacy, but they also face uh, the cowardice of totally staking everything in their life, turning it upside down, risking it all, and entering a new way of spiritual leadership, one which will be greater. It could put your family, your marriage at risk. It could put your livelihood. A lot of stuff can go up for grabs, but we're all there. We're all cowards in the end, and it takes courage. And so then you say, well, I don't have that courage. Well, that's right. The courage is always through Christ. If you're going to have the courage, it's coming back to that incarnational experience and you might say, letting Christ give you the courage.
Fantastic. Well, that is an inspiring note to end on. Thank you very much, Tom. And I look forward to reading more of your work, but I will definitely be encouraging people to get a copy of your book, Spiritual Leadership